Welcome to this video on the poem After Apple Picking by Robert Frost. So in today's video, I'll be going in depth to some of the techniques that Robert Frost has used, the actual narrative of the poem, and even some of its symbolic meaning. So before we start looking at the poem, we need to understand the context and understand its form. So the poem was written in 1914, but published in 1915 in Robert Frost's book, The North of Boston. So for those history people out there, this poem was written around World War I, and he has lived through both world wars, and in his poems, he talks about the anxieties of the changing world through the lens of individual emotions. So a lot of his poems are talking about not a collective of people struggling, but one person in particular, but that kind of echoes everyone's ideas. So he actually wrote during the modernist period in the 20th century. He likes to write with a familiar rhythm and meter, which is a little more traditional, but what makes his poetry quite modernist is his natural diction. So natural diction is actually writing in a conversational tone. So a lot of the poems during this time is more accessible for everyone because it doesn't have over-the-top sophisticated language about ideas that no one can relate to. It's more about the everyday life of the working man, but he's still making it beautiful in the sense that he's using a familiar rhythm and meter, which is something that not a lot of modernist poets did. He didn't like to align himself with a lot of the cliques in the modernist era. He liked to stay true to himself because he feels like, the whole clique thing doesn't really speak to a wider audience. So another bit of inspiration for this poem was that he, in 1900 to 1912, he grew up on a dairy farm. So it's spelled dairy farm, but it essentially means dairy, like milk dairy farm in New Hampshire, which is where he grew up. So he actually grew up in the farm. So a lot of his poems are reminiscent of his time in arduous labor and watching over a farm. And that quiet peacefulness and emptiness of a farmland. So he was working during the industrialization and urbanization era. Meaning there were creations of large machines which took away jobs from people who actually worked on farms, and also urbanization is people losing their jobs due to technology, so they would go into the city and look for other jobs. So that is the context of the poem. Now let's have a look at the form. So the form of the poem is actually free verse. All right, so as you can see here, the poem is a free verse narrative poem. So if you want to be a little fancier in the way you analyze it, you can say that it is a monologue or a soliloquy. So usually in a play, a monologue or soliloquy is when you hear the emotions of the character/persona. So we're revealing the private thoughts. We're inside the mind of the persona. This poem has 42 lines with 25 in iambic pentameter. So iambic pentameter is that conversational tone. It's not lyrical. So it's that sound of da-dum, da-dum, da-dum syllables within a word. So it sounds like the everyday language. If you start focusing on the way you speak, you actually notice that every second syllable is emphasized. It's stressed. 20 lines in the poem rhyme, which is quite odd out of 42 lines. So that indicates that this poem has no predictable or regular fashion. It has a lot of varied lines, so not each line has a certain amount of words or certain amount of syllables, and it also has no stanzas. So it doesn't begin, it doesn't have the structure of an ordinary poem. And the purpose of this is to show that it is a dreamlike state. So the persona is almost as if he's dreaming. This is seen in the linguistic and figurative devices. So linguistic is just everyday use of language. So that means there's a mixed tense, and then sensory details are quite odd. So we don't actually know whether or not this story is linear. We don't know whether or not it's from beginning to end, which makes it very, very interesting. But that is the whole purpose of the poem. We also do not know in the poem what is literal and what is metaphorical. You know, is it really about apples? Is he really picking an apple? Is the ladder really doing this? All right, so now we have a better understanding of the form. Let's go down to this section here. So while you are analyzing the poem with me, you should have, 6 different colored highlighters ready, or maybe you can get the colors of the fonts ready. You will need a red highlighter or a red pen for symbolic techniques, orange for language techniques, blue for sound techniques, green for sensory imagery, purple for features of meaning, and yellow for features of structure. All right, let's get started. So I'm scrolling down. As you can see, there are bits of information jotted everywhere. I'll be collecting my highlighters and going through which section means what. But before we start, the most important thing is that you've already listened to the poem. You already know roughly what the poem is about, and only then are you able to have a true understanding of this analysis. Because when I go through this, I will not be reading the whole poem or explaining bits by bit. I will just be pinpointing the words and elaborating more on it. So you need to have listened to the actual poem. All right, so since you've already listened to the poem, the title, After Apple Picking. So as you can see on the right-hand side, I wrote that this is irony. So, a lot of apple pickers during this time, they were really respected for their work. It's a very, very noble job. You dedicate yourself to farming cropland, cutting it down, growing it back up, making sure it's perfect. So after apple picking, so after a hard day's work, it is not done and it takes over him. There is no after. What is after? So essentially, after apple picking, it's saying that after the end of a job. But in reality, there is no after. It never stops for him. When he finishes the job, he thinks about apples. When he goes into bed, he thinks about apples. When he wakes up, he thinks about apples. And then he's at work thinking about apples. Like I said, this job is very, very respected, and it kind of echoes that well-known line, taste the fruits of our labor. So that tasting the fruits of your labor basically means that you work really hard and then you actually see the product. So he is seeing the product of after apple picking. So he's seeing the product of his job. But the problem is it's too much product. It is so overwhelming. He starts to wonder while he is doing his job, what is the meaning of life? What is the meaning of after apple picking? If he spent most of his life striving to have the best fruits and the best crops, what happens after? All right, so we jump straight into the poem. The first line that we see is my long two-pointed ladder sticking through a tree towards heaven still, and there's a barrel that I didn't fill. Beside it there may be 2 or 3 apples I did not pick. Up on some bough, I am done with apple picking now. These purple lines over here already tell me who the persona is. So we have my, I, there is, so that's present tense. And present tense indicated into the perspective of the actual apple picker. Immediately we know we have jumped straight into this man's mind. In a very literal sense, if we have a look at the green words, we have ladder, tree, barrel, and apples. So these lines are indicating that it is the steps of his job. It's kind of what he sees every day. Ladder, climb on a ladder, look at the tree, grab the barrel, put the apple in the barrel. So So it's almost like a routine. It's something that he does on a day-to-day basis. He is completely used to it. He's becoming like a machine. It's kind of like he's turning his brain off and going 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And the orange lines over here, long, pointed, sticking, still. But I am done with apple picking now. These words is to show that he's so tired. Words like long, that he's done. He's done now. It's sticking. You know, it's to show that he's completely over it. He's completely over this day. The fact that he's so over this day, but he still kind of has a sense of regret. So my 2 pointed ladders sticking through a tree toward heaven still, and there's still a barrel that I didn't fill. Beside it, there may be 2 or 3 apples I didn't pick upon the bough. So, we see here that he has the repetition of didn't. So it's almost like he isn't fulfilled with what he's done in the day. It's kind of like he doesn't have enough time in the day. So work is not complete. The winter is approaching. So winter can be actually symbolic of death and the end of his life. You know, the sense of a incomplete life. You know, what is the point if the work hasn't ended, and will it ever end? So he's saying here that maybe the apple can be symbolic of the fruits of his labor and the fruits of his labor in his life. So he's saying that I didn't get to fill the barrel that I had in life. You know, this could mean that maybe he was overly ambitious. Maybe he thought, I wanted to do all of these things with my life, and I'm reaching the end of my life, which is the winter, but I wasn't able to do everything that I wanted to do. You know, that is one point of symbolism. The repetition of didn't is quite that negative tone. He has this regretful tone, like I wasn't able to finish it. Another point of symbolism that could also indicate death is this word of heaven. So it states in the second line, towards heaven still. Immediately we know that the ladder is a connection between the physical and spiritual world. If we have a look in the book of Genesis, there is the concept of Jacob's ladder. So he sees angels. So, you know, Jacob himself sees the ladder going up to heaven, and he sees angels, and he wants to get away from his jealous brother. So this heaven, immediately we know that this story might be about the afterlife. So how come in the second line we immediately brought ideas from the Bible? Why are we immediately thinking about death? And that kind of follows and flows through the rest of the poem. Now, we get all of these ideas from just the beginning of the poem. Another thing that that you should have a look at is the fact that the poem begins with a sestet. So, like I said in the structure of the poem, it doesn't have a clear structure, but yet the first 6 lines, have a rhyme scheme. You know, let's go through the rhyme scheme together. So, tree, still, fill, 3, bow, now. So that structure is A, B, B, A, C, C. So this structure of A, B, B, A, C, C, the poem begins with a sestet to appear like it is following the average structure of the poem. We do mention that. So the average structure of the poem, sorry, the audio cut out. I put my arm on the microphone, silly old me. All right, so A, B, B, A, C, C. As we mentioned earlier in the form section, there is no clear form, but the opening of this poem is to make it appear like the poem is quite normal, but then things start to get unhinged. So the whole purpose of this poem is to show that he is dreamlike, he's falling asleep, he is exhausted. The beginning is average and normal, but then he starts to go into a daze. And the word that breaks up this daze is the essence of winter sleep on the night. If we move on to line 7 onwards, the essence of winter sleep is on the night. So the line essence of winter sleep already tell us that the season in the day. In a literal sense, winter is coming. So in regards to harvesting and winter, spring is usually the season where the crops grow. Summer is when they blossom and reach the end, and then it comes autumn, and then winter comes along. Winter, you're unable to grow anything. So that means he's at the end of his harvest. That links back to the circular life. It's all the seasons going through again and again. Who knows how long this man has been doing this job for, but he knows that there are 4 seasons in every year, and that at the point of autumn, he needs to pick everything. He's at the end of the harvest season, and winter is coming along, and he needs to have it done by winter. So he knows that he's going to have a long sleep. Winter can also be symbolic of death. So the essence of winter sleep, maybe it could mean the end of a harvest season, but also maybe even the end of his life. So essence of winter sleep on the night, the scent of apples, I am drowsing off now. So this technique here with the 2 dots is actually called a caesura. So, oops, I meant to use the highlighter. Caesura. So this line basically, this semicolon breaks up line 8 of the poem, almost as if it's jolting him awake, or maybe it is to indicate that he is so tired he is falling asleep, or maybe he's in bed. This is where the poem starts to get confusing, and we lose that sense of rhyme and rhythm, and we fall apart from that sestet that we originally saw. So he's in like a dream-like sleep, and things begin to feel as if he's hallucinating. You know, have you ever been so tired that your eyes are drowsy and you're falling asleep and you can't really hear anything, you can't think straight, all you want to do is shut your eyes and turn off? That is how he's feeling, you know. This repetition of the sleep and drowsing and words similar to that sleep imagery is to give us, you know, jump into his world, jump into his exhausting world of apple picking. Not only is it exhausting, but it's kind of like it's the only thing that is on his mind. We can see that in the lines, I cannot rub the strangeness from my sight. This is that helpless exhaustion. Like he can't help it. He's trying to stay awake, but forcing himself to stay awake is causing a strangeness in what he is seeing. So later on in the poem, we start to see a little anecdote. So the scent of apples, I am drowsing off. Anecdote starts at 9. I cannot rub the strangeness from my sight I got from looking through a plain glass. I skimmed this morning from the drinking trough and held against the world of hoary grass. It melted and let it fall and break. So these lines an anecdote. So we are starting to confuse the time and space. We are starting to lose a sense of the narrative structure. But also within this anecdote, there is an allusion, a reference to another text that I don't know if we're very familiar of, but through the looking glass in Alice in Wonderland. So he's basically peering into a new world. He's peering in through this plane of glass, you know, a different world of apples, maybe the end of his life, maybe he wants a different opportunity. But a plane of glass could also mean a mirror. Maybe he's looking at a mirror, he's seeing his own reflection in this glass and looking at himself and really reevaluating what he's been doing all of his life. And the line here, hoary means worn out, silver. So held against the world of hoary grass, hoary could mean the snow on the grass, you know, like little icicles sticking out. We know that winter is coming, but it could also mean his age. Again, that constant referral to the different seasons show that this is a continuation. This is happening again and again and again. So not only every year is the grass becoming silver, but every year this man is becoming more and more silver. And then things get kind of morbid in the lines, it melted, I let it fall and break. That imagery is quite negative, you know, that hoary, fall and break signifies age, but it could also show that maybe this will be his death. Maybe he's envisioning him falling off the ladder and finally dying. So yeah, let's continue on. So, but I was well upon my way to sleep before it fell, and I could tell that the form of dreaming was about to take. So before this, we got a little anecdote of this guy looking at a sheet of ice or a sheet of glass, and he's looking at the snow around him, and then he's starting to think of what his dreams will be like that night. So these yellow lines is actually enjambment. So enjambment here is basically a sentence that is split up to emphasize certain points. So we see in the blue, well, fell, tell, that it's creating this quick movement. It's providing us with a sense of rhythm and movement, but it's almost like as if it's nightmarish. Fall and break. If it melted, I let it fall and break. I can envision this man shutting his eyes, falling behind, and then as well, upon my way to sleep before it fell, I could tell he's like starting to, you know, when you have a dream and you're like waking up and you're in and out of consciousness, that's what it feels like with the quick, sharp lines, the breakup of the enjambment, and to the breakup of that whole yellow sentence and that rhyme scheme. All right. So it's descending into a sleep, short rhyming sentences to create a sense of rhythm and movement, and it's almost nightmarish. So the storyline is confusing again. Is he falling asleep? Is he not falling asleep? Is he in bed at this point, or is he thinking about his bed? If we go back up to line 8, the sense of apples, the strangeness of my sight through a pane of glass, and we scroll down to 18, magnified apples appear and disappear, stem end, blossom end. The instep arch not only keeps the ache, I feel the ladder sway at the boughs bend, and load of apples coming in. So again, these lines, all imagery. You know, not only images of the, you know, of what we can see or visualize in our head, but we can actually feel it. We can smell it, the scent of the apples. So this caters to all senses, to really understanding the persona. All of these feelings, smells, etc. are so familiar to him. This is his lifelong endeavor, this repetitive thinking. It's almost meditative, and it is imprinted into his mind. So it's kind of like he constantly smells apples. He can feel apples. He can envision every single speck, every single fleck of russet showing clear. That is how invested and involved he is with these apples. And, you know, as we saw in lines 14 to 17, he's falling asleep, and then the nightmare starts. The magnified apples appear and disappear, stand and end and blossom end. We see this, you know, we smell it, we can feel it. And the internal and end rhyme of appear, disappear, stem end, blossom end really, you know, helps us visualize these magnifying apples, that word choice of magnifying apples. What I can see is appear, disappear. So I can envision a trough full of water, and then these apples bobbing up and down, stem end, which is the bottom of the apple, and blossom end, the top of the apple. All of these apples in a watery bucket, spinning and spinning around. That is that purpose use of internal rhyme and repetition, you know. And again, the magnified apples could, you know, what could it mean? Could it mean his life, his labor? A bit later in the poem, in line 22, we see the line pressure. Again, pressure can be a metaphor for many things, you know. In a literal sense, it keeps the pressure of the ladder round. Pressure could be literally his foot hurts, you know, keeps the ache, pressure of the ladder round. But it could also mean the pressure of the harvest, the pressure of keeping up with this never-ending harvest. So he feels like my foot hurts, but also it's hurting because he's constantly climbing on every single ladder trying to pick every single fruit from the tree. All right. So he is thinking he probably has many in his life. He has a lot of, he's probably felt this pressure every single year, and he knows he's going to feel it next year and the year after that and the year after that if he's not dead. All right, let me keep reading. So It keeps the pressure of the ladder round. I feel the ladder sway as though the boughs bend. I keep hearing from the cellar bin the rumbling sound of the load and load of apples coming in, and I have had too much of apple picking. I am overtired from the great harvest I myself desired. All right, there is so much to unpack from this section alone. First things first, boughs bend and the rumbling sound. That sound is, it's the boughs bend really kind of snaps us up. It makes us start to notice the next section. It's kind of like an introduction to the next section. And then we have the rumbling sound. That is onomatopoeia. So that sound is so familiar to him. I thought in this point of the story that he is falling asleep, but he can already hear the sound of apples cascading in. So this whole section here, line 25, 26, and 24, I keep hearing from the cellar bin the rumbling sound, a load of apples coming in. This enjambment, this one sentence is split up to 3 to show that there are endless literally non-stop apples overflowing from the harvest. I said literally load of apples. Okay, maybe that's hyperbole, an exaggeration of his endless work. He's buried in his work. That combination of both techniques show that this man is literally just drowning. All he can do is hear these apples. The fact that he can still hear it while he is asleep. He can still envision more and more apples coming in. He, that day he had these apples left on the floor, and then he's gone to sleep and he can just see more and more and more, and it is just non-stop. And we know that it is a dream through the lines 26 and 27, the load on load of apples coming in, for I have had too much. This alliteration is showing that, when you fall asleep and again, things start getting all goofy and weird, and like you open your eyes and it's like day and night, and then your thoughts kind of repeat and go on a circle. That is the point of the alliteration in these 2 lines, to show that he is definitely starting to fall asleep. And again, with the caesura, we have in line 28, I've had too much of apple picking. I am overtired. It's kind of like he is zapping himself out of it. He's like, nah, I've had enough. I think at this point in the story, he is back on the ladder. I don't know whether or not it's a new day, or maybe he's thinking forward and thinking back. So it's basically like he is trying. He wants to keep going. He wants to keep farming. He wants to, give the apples that he's worked so hard on to these people, but he is just exhausted. He is kind of given up for the day. Hopefully not given up on life. So this caesura is showing that he is desperate for rest, right? But this is where things get really interesting. I am overtired of the great harvest I myself desired. What? So basically, he's out here complaining, oh my God, I am so tired. But he put himself in that mess in the first place. This one rhyming couplet, there hasn't been a rhyming couplet in quite a while in this poem. Not since well and fell and whatever. So overtired, I myself desired. So this highlights the word desired. So this is actually a juxtaposition. So he desired this fruit, and that is what is making him tired. So what he wanted is exhausting him. It is the exact opposite of what he wanted. So this harvest could be symbolic of his ambition. Maybe the apples shows how hard he is working. Maybe was he too ambitious? Was he overly ambitious? Is this work that he chose, it doesn't have to be apple picking, it could be something that you chose in life, was it too much to manage? So could it be like, I've signed myself up for this, but I couldn't handle it? So similar to signing up yourself for something but not being able to handle it is actually back to the Bible. Adam and Eve, they were in the Garden of Eden. They were given everything and anything by God, but they were asked to do one thing, which was not to eat the apple from that tree. And then Satan comes along as a snake and convinces Eve to eat it. So that could be the reference to after apple picking. Maybe he's too ambitious. He wants too much from life and he needs to just stop and enjoy it. So, maybe apple picking is too much to manage, but again, he doesn't really have that work-life balance. He is literally thinking about apples every single night. So should he work hard or just enjoy his life? Is he wanting too much from his life that it is mentally and physically exhausting? We see this mental and physical exhaustion in the next line. There are tens of thousands of fruit to touch. That hyperbole, he has, maybe he has actually literally touched tens and thousands of apples. He has loved and cared for every single fruit, again, that fruit of his labor. So he cherished it in each hand and not let fall. So that absolute love and work and pride. But again, meanwhile, even though he sounds like he's so proud of his apples, he's also kind of regretful. He's kind of like, this regretful tone is in a little later in line 36. As of no worth. So we're reaching the next stage of our poem. The next stage of our poem in line 32, this visually indicates to the audience that, we're moving on from this section. It's no longer about the ambitious. Now we're looking at the fact that he didn't let these apples fall. So let me read lines 30 to 36. There are 10,000 fruits to touch, cherish in hand, lift down and not let fall. For all that struck the earth, no matter if not bruised or spiked in stubble, went surely in the cider apple heap as of no worth. This could be a metaphor. So he might be talking about apples and apples falling, but, maybe the apples indicate life. So the apples could indicate life, the creation of apples. So he is raising and growing these apples to be perfect, only to be eventually slipped from his hand and bruised on the ground and put into a cider apple heap. So basically, all things will eventually die. The apple that he's put so much love into will die, it will bruise and it will rot. The seasons are forever changing. That cycle of life, no matter what, he can't keep an apple pristine forever, even though he's worked so hard to perfect his craft, only for it to keep growing and to keep going and to keep picking, only for new apples to come along. This could indicate life. You could be coming into this world and no matter what you do, the world will eventually bruise you. The world will eventually, you will eventually end up in this cider apple heap. So let's continue on. I've starred the line heap. So we surely went to the cider apple heap. So this is actually quite purposeful because in later lines, he rhymes the word heap with sleep. So as of no worth, there can see what will trouble the sleep of mine, whatever sleep is, we're not gone. The woodchuck could say whether it's like his long sleep, as I described, coming on, or just human sleep. So heap was purposely put at the end of the word to start rhyming with all the words sleep later. So for the rest of the poem, it's that constant repetition of heap, sleep, 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 sleep. Sleep is referred to 4 more times at the end of this poem. So it's kind of like he's falling in to that REM cycle. He's deliriously slipping away. So it's kind of like he's envisioning these apples and he's finally falling asleep and he's thinking of a woodchuck. So this woodchuck over here could basically be like maybe he's finally dreaming. He's finally thinking of a woodchuck, which is an animal that hibernates. So he is dreaming about apples again and he just wants to stop dreaming. He wants his long sleep to start. He wants it to be over. He wants to stop thinking about apples just for a second. So he's dreaming about apples again and wants to stop dreaming about it and just sleep. Does it want to just sleep or maybe he's ready to die. Maybe he's ready to be done with his life. So that is where the line a long sleep is, or a human sleep. So that relates to hibernation. Maybe he's comparing himself to a woodchuck, and the woodchuck basically lives to survive. And are we very different from animals? So working life of an animal and hibernating, maybe he's thinking, maybe if he finally sleeps, he will be eventually reborn. So what is the true meaning of life? Maybe the true meaning of life is to work. My final thoughts on the poem is that he uses a lot of contrast. There's a lot of slipping of different tones. At one point, he is quite energetic, and then he's lethargic, so he's really exhausted. He's quite positive about apple picking, but is also quite negative about it. He's obviously really proud of his job, but is also quite sick of it. He has this regretful tone of whether or not he's did the right thing. Maybe was apple picking the correct career choice for him, but then he thinks he's really happy with what he's created. So he's enthusiastic, but then he also has this desire to rest. This poem ends in quite a confusing manner, like he's finally thoughts on the poem is that he also has this desire to rest. This poem ends in quite a confusing manner, like he's finally asleep or maybe even finally dead. But Robert Frost did this on purpose. He did it to really have us consider, what is the meaning of our life? Yeah? All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Had a little smiley face. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.